Chapter 20 of The Cruise of the Falcon by E.F. Knight. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 20. Sport on the Parana. We went on shore and purchased a goodly supply of provisions. Mutton, half an ox at 2d. a pound, potatoes, pumpkins, onions, and other luxuries, 3 demijohns of wine, and a sufficiency of Havana caña to replenish our rum cask withal. We also purchased some paint, so as to make the Falcon beautiful before reaching the capital of Paraguay. The tradesman who sold us this addressed his bill to El Señor Don Malor Inglesa a bordo del yacht. I have seen yacht spelt in many curious ways, such as YATCH, YOT, and YAT, but never before as JOT. We procured some Bolivian and Peruvian silver from the bank before sailing, as we were again to visit paperless regions. We made yet another very useful investment, a large accordion and a noisy hurdy-gurdy, which latter reeled off 4 tunes, the Blue Danube Waltz, a Cloche de Corneville Gallop, a reminiscence of the Grand Duchess, and a boisterous, furious can-can. These purchases were made at the instance of our pilot, Don Juan, who said that they would be quite necessary in Paraguay, where we should be obliged to give balls occasionally, as is the custom for all distinguished travelers like ourselves. It was late when we returned to the beach this night in order to go on board. Arthur and Jim were asleep, so could not hear our loud "Falcon, ahoy!" We looked for a shore boat to take us off. Boats there were plenty, but no men, and what was more important, no oars. There was a large, low building on the shore, which we could see was brilliantly lit up, and in which, from the noise that issued from it, a merry baile evidently was under way. Here we thought we might come across some of the owners of the boats. We were not wrong in our surmise. We went to the door of the ballroom, at which stood 2 serenos, or policemen. These felt all the people as they entered, to see that they carried no knives on their persons, for these had to be left outside. This precaution is generally taken at these not over-aristocratic public bailes in the low parts of a South American seaport. Neither are they idle precautions, judging from the physiognomy of the frequenters of these places. We entered the ballroom, a large whitewashed apartment decorated with bits of colored paper. At the deal tables that served as bars, ugly half-breed Hebes vended vile gin and viler caña. The guests were Italian and Greek sailors, all in their shirt-sleeves, and a few young China girls of anything but dazzling beauty, but making up for this by the extreme affability of their manners. Some might call them too affable. We picked up a boatman and persuaded him, in consideration of $1, to desert for a space the buxom partner he was dancing with, and row us off to the Falcon. At first he absolutely refused to go, and explained his reasons. He could not trust the lady of his affections by herself. She would go off with someone else while he was away. But we were not going to be left boatless at this hour of the night without an effort, so we explained the matter to the young lady, who stood by fanning her hot face, and implored her to promise her mariner not to elope faithlessly with another lover in his absence. The nymph indignantly refused to bind herself by any such vows, and was walking proudly off with her little nose in the air, when, as a last chance, we reminded her that through her flightiness and obstinacy the boatman would lose $1. The mention of so large a sum startled her. She turned and said thoughtfully, $1? Yes, I continued, a Bolivian dollar. I saw that she hesitated and was lost. She was wrapped in meditation for a while, when suddenly a happy thought suggested itself to her, and she said, "Provided that Don Alfonso will promise not to spend any of the $1 until he comes back here to me, I will wait for him." The lovesick swain joyfully undertook to do as she wished, so after half an hour's diplomacy, we were rowed over to our vessel. On Monday, the 5th of June, a strong east by south wind sprang up, enabling us to proceed on our journey. We were told that it would be advisable to take a bill of health from here for Paraguay, so I called early in the morning at the Paraguayan consulate. A stupid Negro girl opened the door to me and drawled out that the great Don, who represented the inland republic, was not in the habit of arriving at his office till 11 o'clock. This day he did not arrive till nearly 1. He asked me to follow him in, and throwing himself in an armchair, deliberately rolled himself a cigarette. Having made himself generally comfortable, he sighed deeply in anticipation of the hard day's work before him, and asked me in a languid and aggrieved voice what I wished that he would do for me. I explained that I required a patente de sanidad for Paraguay. "Show me your papers," he said. I produced my Admiralty warrant and another Spanish document which the captain of the port of the Tigre had kindly furnished me with. Now he saw a chance of making an honest penny without much trouble, and before I could imagine what he was about to do, he pounced down on my papers with his official seal, leaving a huge blue impression on each, and glibly said, "It is a patacon for each seal, senor, if you please, and I will now draw you out a bill of health, 6 patacones, that is 8 in all, 32 shillings. I grew wrath at this gross imposition and disfigurement of my papers. Vain it was for me to expostulate, to urge that I had never asked him for these stamps. His only reply was to shrug his shoulders and say, 'It is done, sir,' all the while holding the documents and admiringly contemplating his handiwork. Evidently he considered that this sealing, whether it was useless to me or not, was a piece of hard work for which he, the worker, must at all events be paid. However, I would not pay up, whereupon he waxed nasty and commenced to throw doubts on the authenticity of my Admiralty warrant. His objections to this were ingeniously absurd and abstruse. He pretended that he could not understand the Admiralty stamp on it, being a colorless impression standing out in relief, unlike his own gaudy blue concern. He thought it must be humbug. He rubbed it suspiciously with his finger, smelt it, and at last let me go in sheer weariness of me. He then turned fiercely to inspect a row of Italian river skippers who were waiting their turn, looking like a patient rainbow, for they wore no coats, and their flannel shirts, as is their wont, were of gaudy colors, one of orange yellow, one of scarlet, and so on. Leaving these poor fellows to suffer their share of Paraguayan blockheadedness, I hurried on board, and in a few minutes we were under way and once more scudding rapidly up the stream. We anchored for the night off the mouth of our old friend, the Rio Carcaveñal. We sailed all the next day by the ever-changing swamps and jungles, past mouths of tributary creeks alive with duck, teal, and geese, by capes and wooded islands and floating camelots, until evening, when we anchored in the midst of a wild and beautiful scenery. Throughout the 8th of June we were becalmed in this spot. After breakfast, Jourdain, Arnaud, and myself, taking with us our shotguns, revolvers, and knives, a ruffianly-looking crew, started in the canoe in search of game. Coasting down a little way, we came to a narrow opening where a small stream clove the densely covered bank. "Let us paddle up that creek," suggested someone. So we shot our canoe within it, and then, to our amazement, found that we were going not up, but down it. The current, and a strong one too, was with us. The little stream did not flow into the broad river, but out of it. As we floated farther on, we passed other small riachos branching from this one, they not feeding it, but all drawing away its waters. This seemed an entire reversion of the ordinary course of things, but on a little reflection we solved the problem. In this part of its course, the Parana is 30 miles wide, and, as is its characteristic throughout, it flows through an intricate network of channels that divide its islands. The broad river in which the Falcon lay at anchor, 2 miles wide though it be, is but one of many, is not even the principal of these many branches. Innumerable riachos, like the one we were now descending, wind tortuously among the untrodden jungles that lie between it and the mighty parallel branch, the Parancito to the right and the Rio Colastena to the left. joining them in unexplored water labyrinths. This will give some idea of the magnitude of this stupendous Parana, with its myriad shifting isles drifting on to fill up channel here, swell promontory there, till they compel the waters to force out new passages through the great alluvial wilderness. Lovely indeed were the shores we beheld as our canoe idly drifted on with the current, deeper and deeper into the secret haunts of carpincho, waterfowl, and tiger. On the banks was a vegetation of incredible luxuriance, not the jungle as of arid Santiago, but a growth full of sap, gigantic, drawn by warm suns from the dark, soft mud, the richest soil in the world, never dry but overflowed at short intervals by the fat and feeding waters of the Parana. Though satiated with tropical scenery, we could not but gaze with enthusiastic amazement at the beautiful nature around us on this warm, still day. It was midwinter, but of the season there were no signs, no decay, no brown leaf, no death. The leaves and flowers were fresh and bright as of an English spring. Great white lilies with broad, dark leaves floated on the water. On the banks rose mighty reeds, aquatic plants, and trees of various foliage. But that which made the wonder of the place was the mass of flowering creepers, lianas, convolvuli, and others that overran all, covering the other vegetation like a great blanket thrown upon the country, climbing over the highest tree tops and then hanging over in festoons and curtains, forming the loveliest bowers and dark-shaded caverns of leaves and flowers such as a fairy gardener could alone contrive. Little sheltered houses with floors of soft brown earth, dwellings for the lucky carpinchos only, fitted to be a summer palace of Titania herself or Undine fresh from the warm river. We landed and wandered a while in this glorious garden, wondering and enjoying the loveliness of it, and gathering beautiful orchids and flowers strange to us with as much delight as if we had been children once more, until animals that were good to eat came to look at us, when sentiment vanished and the murderous instincts of the hunter took its place. We spared the parrots, kingfishers, monkeys, and other innocent inhabitants of this paradise, who, judging from their fearlessness, knew little of cruel man, but shot several monte hens, pretty birds with russet wings, red legs, and green beaks, a welcome addition to our larder. We also robbed a wild bee's nest, and caught a few pounds of a sort of small silver fish. We drifted on and on down this fascinating little stream that wished to bear us away to who knows whither, and into what unknown wilds, and were loath to turn. But we had the current against us on our homeward journey, so reluctantly we took to our oars and rowed back to the broad river where the Falcon lay snugly at anchor, with the blue smoke issuing from the galley chimney, to welcome us and remind us that it was tea time, and the most appetizing smell of grilled turkey's legs scenting the air around. Those were happy days we spent on the Parana, days that, when we recall them years hence, will doubtless bring sighs of regret for their vanished pleasures. I have now related but one of our very many wanderings on these wild shores when becalmed. Tedious this journey was, but not a waste of time. Nothing in all my voyages delighted me so much as this river cruise, for here the traveler, when he lands, walks in perpetual excitement, is exploring the unknown, and cannot tell what new strange sight will present itself next, what wild beast he may not at any moment encounter. There is a mystery and a loneliness that pervades the scenery of the Parana that agreeably affects the imagination. A mystery, for are not its shores unexplored forests, its sources indefinite, in an unknown region that is still a sort of fairyland of fable and romance, even as it was when the first Spaniards came and sought the El Dorado? A loneliness, too. The towns on its banks are far apart, and there are no roads across the swamps and jungles that divide them. For days of journey on this river, the traveler sees no sign of human life on the shore, only interminable stretches of palm groves and forests and morasses. So complete and irreclaimable a wilderness extends on the Chaco shore of the river that it is only in certain spots, far apart, that the wild Indian himself can find a way to the bank from the inner forests to fish. The rank, dense growth is altogether impassable. It is the utter desert as far as man is concerned, intolerable to him with mosquitoes and ague. If he penetrate it but a little way, awe seizes him to behold that gigantic network of plants that shuts him in as if in prison. In these dark depths, one is oppressed by a feeling of suffocation, of restrained freedom, as in a nightmare. The sublime pampas, with its boundless horizon, impresses man with a sense of its immensity, an immensity of freedom. Likewise does the solemn Chaco impress one, but with a different sense of immensity, as of an immense prison, a dark tangle of boughs that goes on forever, and from which there is no escape. On the 10th of June the rain fell heavily, but a fresh pampero was blowing, which continued for nearly 3 days, enabling us to make good progress up the river. All this time we were ascending reaches so broad and long that always in one, often in many directions, the horizon was of water, as on the ocean. The water, too, was quite rough on these vast lake-like expanses, so that the little floating camelotes now hove to, the wind being against the tide, rolled and pitched in the choppy waves like ships at sea, their broad sails of lily leaves being all taken aback and showing their light-colored undersurfaces, while the stems, but slender masts, bent to the strong wind. At last we saw, far away on our starboard hand, on the hills of the mainland of the province of Entre Rios, divided from us by leagues of great islands and swamps, the massive cathedral of the ancient city of Parana, and on our port hand, beyond other wastes intersected by 1,000 winding channels, the city of Santa Fe, the two old provincial capitals nearly 30 miles apart, looking across at each other from the two banks of the mighty river. It was but a little beyond this that we entered the main branch of the Parana, which is the most eastward, skirting the mainland of the Entre Rios. So now we had on our starboard hand no longer swampy deserts, but the barranca, as it is called, a precipitous range of forest-topped cliff that descends abruptly into the river, so that many places no landing is possible. We crossed the Banco de la Paciencia, the Bank of Patience, a sandy accumulation that in one place fills up the broad bed of the Parana, and through which the narrower deep-water channel winds in sharp zigzags. A wind that is thus fair for one reach may be a headwind in the next, and the river craft are often delayed for weeks on this well-named shoal. But our Jovian virtues were not to be tested here. Our luck had changed since Rosario, for the wind was such as enabled us to lay right through the channel, though in some turns we were as close-hauled as was possible. The pilot kept his lead ever going as we skirted the shallows, and he shouted out his "Arriba, Horsa," and "Bueno" in the most rapid succession. No other sailing craft on the river could have crossed the Paciencia with one wind, as we did, and Don Juan was ever boasting of this great feat to every skipper and pilot he met during the voyage. At midday of June the 12th, the pampero died away, and a calm, followed by a headwind, detained us at anchor until the evening of the 16th. We lay close under the barranca in 12 fathoms of water. This cliff was here a sort of chrome-colored earth, full of curious fossils, so we named a steep point below our anchorage Fossil Bluff. The summit of the barranca was clothed with elephant grass, prickly pears, palmettos, aloes, tree ferns, and other subtropical vegetation. There were no signs of man or his works anywhere on this mainland, but some wild horses approached the edge and gazed at us with evident curiosity. We went on shore with our guns the morning after our arrival, shortly before daybreak. We beached our canoe at the entrance of a profound and beautiful ravine or gully that clove the barranca. The fossil cliffs, fantastically shaped, overhung it on either side, a rich vegetation covering every irregularity in them that offered a holding place for roots. Below, a little stream followed the windings of the ravine, losing itself in swamps and pools shaded by willow groves and dense canebrakes, the large white lily that is such a feature of the Parana scenery, of course, covering every sufficiently moist spot. Arnaud and Jourdain went up to the higher land, where they shot some partridges, ducks, and pigeons. I went down into the swamp to try my luck with the carpinchos, whose footprints were everywhere on the soft mud, and whose pig-like splashings and gruntings I heard among the canes. These animals are very shy of man, and it is difficult to approach them without giving notice to their keen senses. So I lay in ambush among some myrtles on a dry spot overlooking the canebrake, and with a charge of 00 in my gun, patiently waited for some unwary hog to pass. As I sat here at sunrise, all the life of this solitude awakened around me. The songs of many birds began to break forth, some sweet of notes, some harsh, as if from little throats hoarse and sore from too much feeding on the hot, acrid juices of the tropic berries. As I lay motionless, the little birds showed little fear of me, considering me a harmless sort of animal. They perched and sang on the bushes close to me. There were funny little parakeets, very gossipy, staid little gray owls with big round hazel eyes contemplating me solemnly, very musical canaries, and others. It was amusing to watch their pretty antics in this free aviary. There was one little bright-plumaged fellow with an impudent orange and pink beak and cocked-up tail that was perched on a twig within 2 yards of me, on one leg, still asleep. Not the early bird this, but a little sluggard. Of a sudden rang forth an ominous sound high up in the sky. Gawk, gawk, a long-drawn, melancholy, hungry cry that the little birds knew but too well. There was for a moment a fluttering, a frightened chattering, and a trembling among the tiny people, and then there was a dead silence where a few seconds back was so much joyous song. The little sleepy fellow woke with a start, gave a little shrill scream, and nearly fell into my lap with terror. Quack, quack! It was a huge cha-cha, or turkey buzzard, slowly soaring above. The birds of prey had arisen and were looking out for their breakfasts among the other early birds. Ugly coranchos, the vultures of South America, kites, eagles, and hawks now crossed the sky over us at intervals. All the bird world was awake. The kingfishers, storks, ibis, and other so numerous fish-eating birds of this region were hunting in the inky slough in front of me, and when one hooked up some fine prize, there would be a regular fight over it between 3 or 4 of them, accompanied by angry yells. The ants and the beetles had also now turned out of bed. I was surrounded everywhere by a teeming animal life that was the most interesting to watch, and was being lulled into a sleepy reverie, when suddenly there was a crackling of bush, a loud grunt, and there, some 20 yards off, among the reeds, I beheld the dark form of the object of my patient waiting, a carpincho, and a very big one, too. I fired my charge of 00 into him, and quickly reloaded, but, alas, this beast is hard to kill. For a moment he was stupefied, the blood was pouring from his nostrils, he shook himself, and with a grunt of pain and rage plunged into the morass, and was far away before I could fire again. I tracked him some way by his blood, but at last came to a place where he had taken to the water, so was obliged to give up the search and return to the Falcon with empty hands. I employed the afternoon in repairing our Berthon collapsible boat. This was rather an old one, and was pierced by several holes. When a Berthon boat is stove in, it has the advantage over other boats in not requiring a ship carpenter to repair it. The best person to put it in serviceable condition again is a lady's maid. I took ours on shore, turned it upside down, and mended it very nicely with one of Arnaud's shirts. While we were anchored in this place, we caught many fish. We passed a stout line from our stern to the shore, about 50 yards, and hung it at intervals with lengths of copper wire, terminating in large-size hooks baited with beef. We caught, for the most part, amados and patis, both excellent eating, and averaging about 3 pounds each. The monster dorados, however, that defied our attempts to catch them, bit many of the fish off our lines, leaving nothing of them but the heads. The fish we caught were all very fierce, biting at everything they came across when landed on our deck, and barking like dogs. The finny inhabitants of the Parana seem to be all of a very ferocious disposition, and much inclined to bark and bite in this way. It is dangerous to bathe in the river Paraguay and Upper Parana on account of a tiny fish that infests some parts of these rivers. If you jump overboard anywhere where these voracious little creatures are, 1,000 or so will attack you and simultaneously take a bite each out of you, so that you are worse than flayed and leave the water 1/4 inch thinner all over your body than when you went in. A most unpleasant way of banting. On the 16th of June the wind was northerly, but there were signs of change in weather in the threatening sky. There is no country where the health and spirits of man are so dependent on the state of the weather as in the River Plate, and this is not difficult of explanation. This is said to be the most electric region in the world, and certainly nowhere else are the phenomena produced by electrical disturbance more beautiful and terrible. No one can reside here even for a few months and fail to observe one very general rule in the meteorological changes over this portion of the continent. For days, or for weeks even, the wind will blow from the north, and all this time the weather will become sultrier and more oppressive with pent-up electricity, until at last, to the relief of all nature, there will be a crash of thunder and torrents of rain, and the cold hurricane of the Pampero will sweep over the parched land, more or less violent, according to the previous duration of the north wind, and hence the greater or lesser intensity of that exceptional electric condition of the atmosphere. For 4 days the norte had been blowing, and now, on the 16th, the weather became intolerably oppressive. The hot, parching wind seemed to dry up the pores of the skin, and so enervated us all with its poisonous breath that we were too languid and uncomfortable even to eat our breakfasts or row on shore or undertake the slightest exertion. And thus was it not only with us, but with all animal life. The shores of the river, ordinarily so noisy with the songs of birds and chirping of shrill cicalas and 1,000 mingling cries, were as silent now as if death had suddenly fallen on the land. All nature was in suspense. In the afternoon the stifling sensation was more intense. The air was suffocating, and the wind entirely died away. The barometer fell rapidly, and at 6 in the evening a ruddy light came up in the southwest. The tension was about to be broken. The stillness was full of awe. Then, with a hissing sound, the hurricane came rushing up the river with its accompaniment of plentiful rain, vivid lightning, and loud thunder. The sky assumed an extraordinary lurid color that was reflected by all the landscape. What was the most remarkable was the instantaneous and violent change of temperature, and general sensation of relief. We were now shivering with cold before the bracing gale, and all our languor was dispelled in a moment. When the first burst of the Pampero, a terrific squall that lasted for about 10 minutes, had subsided, we weighed our anchor and scudded up merrily before the favoring wind till some time after dark, when we came to an anchor under a promontory of the barranca called Cerrito Point. For several days after this we progressed but slowly, letting go and weighing anchor at short intervals in consequence of the frequent calms, but occupying the many periods of enforced delay pleasantly enough with various sport on the ever-changing banks, though I am rather surprised that none of us ever caught fever after our long wadings under the hot sun among these poisonous swamps. The skill of our pilot in guiding our vessel up the intricate channels of the Parana was marvelous. For 1,400 miles he knew every feature of the stream, where the deep water was always to be found, and where the channel across the more shifting shoals was constantly changing from one side of the broad river to the other, and had to be discovered by his experienced eye from appearances that conveyed no intelligence to us. Even with a vessel drawing 2 instead of nearly 7 feet, a pilot would be necessary to ascend the Parana. No stranger could find his way among this labyrinth of islands and branch streams. He would most probably take one of the false channels, as they are called, and find that he was ascending one of the many rivers of the Chaco instead of the main network of channels, being brought at last to a cognizance of error by a flight of arrows from the bank, or a threatening band of naked, spear-brandishing horsemen coming down upon his wood parties. Chapter 21